Good afternoon, you guys. It's your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. Don't miss basketball conversations every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time, right here on this channel, where we discuss, basketball related news, topics, debate discussions, and things of that sort. You know what I mean? So go ahead and check it out. Basketball conversations every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. All right, let's get down to business here, shall we? So why do I decided to make this title of this video about Doug Collins, about why he left the Bulls in 1989 here. Okay. Now, Doug Collins in the documentary didn't really reveal about why he why he got dismissed as the Bulls head coach in 1989. He just didn't elaborate it any further. Um, he basically kind of said, like, just a sense, just a sense. He really didn't want to answer the question at all, which is, I understand, understandable if that's what he didn't want to do. But a lot of us, including myself, who study the game, can have a good understanding about why he did not last that long as a Bulls head coach. Now, let me get into about who Doug Collins is. Okay, so Doug Collins was basically was the number one overall pick in the 73 draft by the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, he played on the USA Olympic team in 1972 in Munch. Okay, that was the USA team that got screwed against the Soviets in the gold medal game and basically finished with the silver medal. One of the worst screw jobs in sports history. If you haven't checked it, you haven't seen that game, go check it out, man. One of the biggest travesties in sports history, bar none. All right. So, after, injuries, to his feet and knees, began to plague him in 1979, he retired and became a coach. Started going into coaching, basically joined Bob Weinshauer's staff at Penn University and then followed him later on to Arizona State. This is where his coaching career began. He got his first coaching opportunity in 1986 with the Chicago Bulls that was featured by young Michael Jordan. All right. Now, Steve Allback, I should say Stan Allback, basically was the predecessor at that time. Basically finished off a year where they won basically 30 games, but made the NBA playoffs against the greatest team, one of the greatest teams in NBA history, the '86 Celtics. All right, even though Jordan was scoring at will, and which featured the 63-point performance, it wasn't enough because he didn't have enough offensive firepower, and the offense was basically went through Michael Jordan. So they lost in a quick 3-game sweep. Okay, but you know the thing with Doug Collins is that Doug Collins was basically a kind of person that was very fiery, very passionate, and really rubs through in his coaching. You know what I mean? He's a very intelligent mind and pretty much has a really good eye for the game of basketball. And it really showed, you know what I mean? Because immediately when Doug Collins came in, his team started to show major improvement in up 10 games each of his first 2 years. And then in 1987, he coached them to a 50-32 record. Then also, you know what I'm saying? And then in 1989, he helped them lead to a Cinderella run to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they ended up losing to the Detroit Pistons. But the reason why that I believe that Doug Collins left after the 88-89 season was because he didn't want to play the triangle offense that Tex Winter was trying to propose to Collins. Remember, Jerry Krause brought in Tex Winter to join the coaching staff along with Phil Jackson. Okay, and the thing was is that Tex Winter was so instrumental of that triangle offense in the championship years. Doug Collins didn't want to use it because he felt that the offense was too complicated, and Tex Winter was so persistent on using that offense to the point where Doug Collins crazy to where he basically put him on the scores table and didn't even feature him on the sideline and threw out the bench. So basically, Tex Winter had to feed the triangle offensive theory messages to Phil Jackson, which basically basically had the understanding that Tex Winter's offense wasn't going to last very long with Doug Collins as coach. That's why I think, well, to my opinion at least, why he got fired after the 88-89 season, because he really did a good job as the coach of the Chicago Bulls of improving the team. But here's the big trade I want to keep you guys on. It's gonna be used a lot heavily in this video here. Doug Collins is a very heavily emotional and very outgoing. He was basically an emotional person, an emotional coach that basically rubs his emotions a lot in his coaching. And many times it could lead you some good, short-term results, but in the long run, it's just not going to work because over time, players get tired of your emotional act and basically get tired of your emotional, instabilities. Okay, and this is going to be a theme here in this coaching here. So stick with me for a second. Okay, so after he got removed as the Bulls head coach, he spent some years in Turner Sports working as a basketball analyst. Okay, then he was given another coaching opportunity with the Detroit Pistons in 1995, basically coaching another legend in Grant Hill. And the same thing happened again. The Pistons were slowly improving. They made the playoffs in their first year, even though they got swept by the Magic in three. But then the 96-97 season is when they made their huge leap because nobody expected them to, do much of anything, even though they were still the young team up and coming. Because remember, they had Allen Houston, who was having a really good couple of years in Detroit, but basically he left as a free agent to the New York Knicks. So that 96-97 season was a bit of a surprise there because heading into that Christmas game against the Chicago Bulls, all right, in 96, they were a 20-5, which is basically was one of the most shocking records of that time. They were 20-5, and then they were fighting for second and third seeding in the Eastern Conference until the second half of the season when they basically went on a tailspin. They went on to several losing streaks. They were losing at least 3 to 4 or 5 games in a row. And I think in March they basically lost at least pretty much probably 11 or 12 games in that month of March, and pretty much dropped them from at least from the third seed to at least to the fifth seed in the Eastern Conference. And there was a lot of reasons for that. Otis Thorpe, who was basically their starting power forward, really was not a big fan of Doug Collins. Okay, and I researched some articles about what happened during that 96-97 season, and what I found is that Otis Thorpe, you know, that Otis Thorpe pretty much felt that Doug Collins was not using him on the offense pretty much, and basically decided that, hey, if I'm not being part of this team, but if the coach is not including me, what am I doing here? And pretty much there was a perception that he pretty much quit on the team. But it all came to a head. This was a game on February the 2nd of 1997 when they were with the Utah Jazz. The Pistons lost that game, but the Karl Malone, who went on to win the MVP that year, scored 41 points in that game. Do you want to know how many points Otis Thorpe scored in that game? 0. Zip, zilt, nada. And because of that rift, it pretty much shifted the direction of that team down to a downward spiral. All right, because then Doug Collins was not able to try to patch things up with Otis Thorpe, and his emotional tirades towards the team were starting to rub off the players the wrong way. All right, and so they went on and lost in a tough 5-game series to the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, and the 96-97 season, there were high expectations coming in to try to contend for the Eastern Conference. And unfortunately, things didn't work out for him because then halfway into the season, in mid-February, Doug Collins was basically removed as a head coach of the Detroit Pistons. And, Grant Hill and some of the players felt like, it was gonna be much more enjoyable now because we didn't have to listen to Doug Collins, harp around, yell at them, and then basically go through the emotional tirades all the time. Because listen, as much as Doug Collins is really a good coach as he is, I'm not denying that at all. The problem with Doug Collins consistently is that he lets his emotions wear on his sleeve. And he's so heavily passionate on the game that over time, the players start to get tired of it and they stop listening to you. That's why I think Otis Thorpe had a problem with Doug Collins and why he left as a free agent. And then over time, as patient as Grant Hill was, because remember, when Grant Hill was basically a senior in Duke, he played with his son, Mr. Chris Collins, okay? But over time, though, that emotional instability and the inability to keep his emotions in check was pretty much the downfall of his time in Detroit. And then pretty much in an article I found from the Baltimore Sun, Grant Hill pretty much said, and quote, "I'm not going to lie. I didn't enjoy going to practices. I didn't enjoy going to games. I wasn't going to quit, but I did enjoy life." And then when he basically asked about if he had anything to do with the firing of Doug Collins, he pretty much said, "The perception is that there's going to be blood on my hands, but I know I didn't go in and make any demands about this. I'm comfortable with that. So so I know that I can face you all, face my teammates, and face Doug. All right. And he also pretty much said that there was no love lost between Collins and the other team and the other players when despite winning 100 games in the previous 2 years, his abrasive and emotional style of coaching was starting to rub the players off the wrong way, which is something that I've been consistently talking about. He also said, "I didn't let the little things bother me, but I could tell it wouldn't be much longer," said Brian Williams. Okay, that's what Brian Williams said when he was first coming into Detroit. Playing in the first year in Detroit in the days of the firing, I became increasingly aware that Doug Collins won games and we had lost and we the players had lost the games. Now during that time, the Pistons, pretty much were on a downward spin and ended up missing the playoffs as Alvin Gentry basically, took over the team. But that was a constant theme with Doug Collins. Every time his team started to improve, his abrasive and emotional style of coaching was rubbing the players off the wrong way. And I believe that this has been a constant theme for Doug Collins and why he was dismissed in Chicago and why he got dismissed in Detroit. So after 4 years of working as an analyst for NBC, he gets a third chance and coaches in Washington with Michael Jordan, who was coming out of retirement. All right. And even though he improved the team by at least 18 games throughout those 2 years, I mean, they pretty much won only 37 games both of those years, and pretty much the team didn't do nothing. Now, I cannot blame that entirely on Doug Collins for that because Michael Jordan was the executive and he was the guy that was making, the roster decisions. You know what I mean? So that one, I wouldn't say that's not entirely on him, but it certainly would have helped if he would have placed a bit more of the younger players there. You know what I mean? But that's not entirely his fault. Then he got another chance of coaching the Philadelphia 76ers. And when he started out there, they started out 3-13 in the 2010-2011 season, but then and turned it around and they clinched the seventh seed in the Eastern Conference in the playoffs. All right. Then in 2011 and 2012, they went on to upset the heavily favored Chicago Bulls in 6 games, pretty much which is when Derrick Rose tore up his ACL and pretty much ended his career on the spot. So, and then they ended up surviving and ended up going up against the Boston Celtics in a tough 7-game series where they ended up losing in the process. All right. And so that's pretty much, what it was. And then he basically decided to resign in 2013 to try to spend more time with his family. But yeah, I think overall, when you look back at Doug Collins' time as a coach, I can pretty much say he's a very underrated coach, but he's not highly regarded as an upper echelon coach. And the reason because he has a hard time adjusting his style. He's an abrasive person. He's overly emotional. And more importantly, the little things that he does in practices and certainly during games rub players off the wrong way. And in short term, you can get really good results, playing those emotional cards. But in the long run, it just will not work because players will get tired of your act and they'll start ignoring you. And that's pretty much what happened when he was in Chicago and when he was in Detroit. Okay. Because I remember that the documentary, in the Last Dance documentary, where Doug Collins was pretty much sweating through his suit shirt and his pants. And that's not healthy. That's just certainly not healthy. And plus, in his first game when he was coaching the Bulls, he was chewing his gum so hard that it became a powdery substance. And Michael Jordan literally had to give him a glass of water, give him a cup of water, and pretty much said, "Hey, drink this water, get that stuff off your mouth. I'm not going to let you lose." And those things, those overly emotional things and that abrasive tendencies really was starting to rub people's off of the perception of him the wrong way. And because he's not a bad guy, I'm not saying he's a bad person at all, because he's a very intelligent coach and a very understanding coach. What I'm saying is those abrasive things and his overly emotional tactics on his teams pretty much was his downfall because he could not get over his own way, and as a result, he didn't achieve what he should have achieved. You know what I mean? And that's why Phil Jackson is more highly regarded, because he's not that type of person, but he's always a calm, cool, collective person with basically a different directive approach to try to get the player's message. All right. So at the end of the day, that's pretty much what I believe of what happened to Doug Collins in '89. And pretty much I rambled a bit about what his coaching time was during the NBA. You know what I mean? Even though now he's an advisor with the Chicago Bulls. But that's pretty much what I have on that perspective, though. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section about Doug Collins and what he was as a head coach. And I'll post more videos later on today. Y'all take care, guys.